Good morning. I would like to welcome you all to the International Holocaust Remembrance Day commemoration ceremony for 2021, which is held in partnership between the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and the Embassy of Israel. My name is Richard Jones and I'm head of the Human Rights Department in the FCDO. In these difficult times, it is as important as ever that we continue to mark Holocaust Memorial Day to remember the indescribable suffering of the victims and survivors of the Holocaust, and to ensure that such evil never happens again. Unfortunately, for obvious reasons, we're obliged to hold this year's event virtually. We will start proceedings with a message from Lord Pickles, followed by a speech by the Israeli ambassador, Her Excellency Zipi Hotoveli. The Foreign Secretary will then give a speech, followed by a testimony by Janine Weber, BEM, who will give a first-hand account of her experiences. Then we will listen to a prayer by Cantor Johnny Turgle, followed by a short video commemorating the occasion, accompanied by music performed by Ben Andrew and Helena Vince. Thank you very much for your attention.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm very honoured to be sharing a virtual platform with the new Israeli ambassador to the court of St James, Tipsy Hotoveli, and also, of course, with my old friend Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary. I'm particularly looking forward to listening to the testimony of Janine Weber. This year there are some people missing, not just by the turning of the years, but by the dreadful coronavirus. At this event last year, I was speaking to Lillian Black, the wonderful woman behind the Holocaust Centre at Huddersfield University. We were talking about the future. We were talking about a proposed role for her at the memorial in London. I didn't realise it, but it would be the last time that we met face to face, because sadly Lillian died of COVID-19 a few weeks ago. With her passing, and with other friends passing, it means, in the words of this year's theme to Holocaust Remembrance, that we need to be a light in the darkness. For we live truly in a world at which the truth sits side by side by denial, by distortion, and by downright lies. That's what the new Memorial and Learning Centre right next to Parliament is hoped to address. We will remember the millions of people murdered in the Shoah, in Rwanda, in Cambodia, in Darfur and in Srebrenica. We'll remember them not as statistics, but as individuals who had the possibility of life, of happiness, and of success. For me, I remember a Jewish French citizen born in Nancy in 1937, Bernard Kollenstein. We shared the same birthday. On the day I was born, Bernard should have been 15 years old. We could have spent the next 60-odd years exchanging mutual birthday greetings. But I've only ever seen a photograph of Bernard. We never met, because in November 1942, Bernard was murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. He barely made 5 years old. But each New Year's Day, and each Holocaust Remembrance Day, and of course on our mutual birthday, I remember Bernard. I remember him with dignity. I remember him with humanity. And I firmly believe it's the power of remembrance, it's the power of events like this that ultimately will shine a bright light into the darkness and defeat those evil powers that seek to deny the truth of the Shoah.
It is an honor to be here with you virtually, including the Foreign Secretary and Lord Pickles, and in particular, the survivors. I want to thank the FCDO and all those who have made this possible. Every year on this day, people across the globe unite. We unite to remember the 6 million Jews who were brutally murdered in the Holocaust. For my family and I, this occasion is a deeply personal one. The grandfather of my husband was a survivor himself. Shmuel Freiberg was one of 8 brothers and sisters. He lived through the horror and terror of Auschwitz and Dachau. But unlike his siblings, Shmuel Freiberg survived when the rest of his family did not. Because they were murdered like millions of other Jews, when the Nazis wanted to extinguish any trace of Jewish life. That is why we must protect and preserve the memories of the survivors, so that future generations understand the horrors of the Holocaust, so that they learn the lesson of where anti-Semitism leads. This task couldn't be more urgent. When we look out across the world, we see an ugly rise in anti-Semitism. From vandalism of Jewish institutions and the attacks on Jewish customs like shechita, to the anti-Jewish racism that openly thrives on social media. From the anti-Semitism of the Iranian regime and the hatred of the extremist right, to those who sympathize with Hamas and Hezbollah, terrorists on the extremist left. Just like the COVID pandemic, we should remember that anti-Semitism is a pandemic too. But in this case, we can help protect society with the lesson of history. And sadly, there is one lesson from history that is often forgotten. The lesson of 1948, when the Jewish state was reborn. From being a stateless people, we Jews once again became a sovereign people. Sovereign in our homeland and able to offer a home to any Jew in danger. This brings us to a difficult truth, because had Israel existed just a few years earlier, it could have saved millions of Jews, just as it has rescued Jewish refugees from harm since 1948. That is why it is shocking that even today, while we declare solidarity against anti-Semitism, some seek to undermine the Jewish people's ultimate protection against it. Some who claim to have learned the lessons of history. This so-called anti-Zionists single out Israel from hostility and hatred. They oppose my country's very existence. And when they do so, they all too often apply a double standard not applied to any country, other than the world's only Jewish state. And this double standard proves that anti-Zionism is just the latest mutation of that ancient virus, anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, having survived the Holocaust, my husband's grandfather, Shmuel Freiberg, moved to Israel. He fought in Israel's War of Independence in the Golani Brigade of the IDF, and he lived to see what his siblings did not, the rebirth of the Jewish state. Decades later, after my husband's grandfather had passed away, my husband fought in the same unit to uphold the freedom and security that the State of Israel has brought for the Jewish people. So as we today remember the 6 million, as my family remember my husband's family, as we together say the words, never again, let others be reminded of this lesson of history and of the remarkable difference that the State of Israel has made, a country that has for decades given light and hope to our people and to our world.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be able to join you, albeit virtually, for this Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration. And I want to thank Ambassador Hotoveli for the invitation. And on this solemn day, we reflect on the Holocaust and the depths that humanity can sink to. We honour the millions who lost their lives. We pay tribute to those who survived. We pledge never to forget and never to end the fight against the scourge of anti-Semitism. We feel this commitment deep in our souls. And as a founder member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and a proud supporter of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation, the UK is determined that the flame of memory must never be snuffed out. And we believe in the value of education to overcome hate and prejudice. Dangerous expressions of anti-Semitism and attempts to distort the Holocaust have been witnessed once again in recent months. Once again, those that have peddled hate have taken the opportunity to use a crisis to target minorities, including Jews. Last year, the Community Security Trust reported that online anti-Semitism in the UK was the highest on record. It's both disgraceful and tragic that such behaviour and such prejudice still lingers today, and that some seek to use a global health crisis to fuel hatred instead of compassion. The UK government remains absolutely committed to protecting the Jewish community, and we've been working together particularly closely over the last year. We continue to support security for Jewish schools, colleges, nurses, and other community sites, including synagogues, through our Protective Security Grant. The campaign to defend freedom of religion or belief is one of my top human rights priorities. And of course, another effect of COVID-19 has been the postponement or the cancellation of today's commemorations. Museums and memorials have been temporarily closed, and the number of visitors to Holocaust museums has dropped dramatically. But that only serves to make today's event and others around the world all the more important. Like so many things during this pandemic, we experience them apart, but we know that our feelings are shared. I learnt about the Holocaust firsthand from my family. I listened around the dinner table to the anguish of my grandmother, lamenting that she had left her parents to perish in the death camps when she fled Czechoslovakia in 1938. And of course, it's by coming together as communities and families, breaking bread around the dinner table, that we share tradition, we share history, we share personal stories, and we commemorate the past. The history and the testimony of survivors must be constantly renewed as part of our collective memory, so we pass it on to future generations. So in this moment, when we can't come together in person, let us, each one of us, dedicate ourselves to this task with renewed vigour. The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day this year is "Be the light in the darkness," the powerful words that recall the survivor Gina Turgel. And she said, "We will continue to do our bit for as long as we can, secure in the knowledge that others will continue to light a candle long after us. Let us never forget. Let us keep the candle alight." Thank you.
Hello, I am Janine Weber. I was born in Poland in 1932. I am now 88, Eastern Poland, in a town called Lvov, or now it's Lviv. Lvov was a very beautiful town. It still is beautiful. Before the war, there were 3 communities, almost equally divided: Polish, Ukrainian, and the Jewish community. And there were about 150,000 Jews who lived in Lvov. In 1939, the war started. Germany and Russia had an agreement. They divided Poland into 2. Western Poland became German, Eastern Poland, where we lived, became Russian. And the Russians came to our town, and they stayed for 2 years. The Nazis arrived in 1941. Very soon as they arrived, the persecution started not only by the Nazis, by the Ukrainians. And then the Germans, the Gestapo started rounding up Jewish men. My father, who had wanted to escape, didn't want to be caught, jumped from our second floor balcony onto the first floor and hid underneath. When the Gestapo started knocking at our door, my mother had to open it. They didn't find my father and they left. Became very worried, and it was the first time I was facing the Gestapo armed soldiers. My father survived this jump, although he's broken his leg. We had to leave our flat. As the ghetto wasn't ready yet, they gave us a room for my parents, my brother who was 2 years younger, and me. I was 9, my brother was 7. My grandmother, who used to take care of me, came with us. My parents very quickly decided to dig a hole under the wardrobe in case they were rounding up people. And indeed, very soon we learned that they would be coming. So my mother, my brother, and myself, we hid in that hole. My father and my grandmother and my cousin and her mother, who lived as well in that little house, they hid as well. The Gestapo found them hiding in the loft. They didn't find us hiding in the hole under the wardrobe. And they took them away and they shot them. My mother had told me a little later. Then we hid in another place when we heard the Gestapo arriving. We hid in a shed or kennels, which was in the courtyard. And again, the Gestapo didn't find us there and they left. Very soon we were told to move to the ghetto. We were given a small room for my brother, my mother, and myself. The conditions were atrocious. There was lack of food, disease. They were hanging people and forcing everybody to look at them. People were dying and children, dead corpses lying around. My mother became ill with typhus, and my uncle, her brother, in order to protect her, to hide her, carried her into the cellar of that building. I went to see her one day after a few days, and my mother didn't respond to me at all. And I got so frightened that I ran out of the cellar. My uncle very soon told me that my mother had died. I was left with my brother. My uncle found a family, Polish farmers, to hide my brother and me. He paid them. But one day, the daughter of the family, who was about 20, came with a German soldier with an SS, and I knew she brought him to kill us, because by then I knew that they were killing all the Jews, including the children. They killed my brother. He was 7. For some reason, I cannot explain. They didn't want to kill me, and they told me to go. I had with me the name and address of a young Polish man called Edek, or Edek, as you would pronounce in English. Edek was a night watchman of a convent. He was a friend of my family. When the war started, he told my uncle that if we ever needed him, he will help us. I managed to find him. He was hiding 13 Jews, and I was the 14th. We were in a hall, very small, with planks to lying in and chairs to sit. It was very hot, and there was very little food. My auntie would go out at night. She would buy some food the following day and come back the following night. I stayed in that hall for a year. There was very little food, and she managed to get me some false papers. So one night we left the hall. She took me to the Polish committee, and when they looked at me, they thought I was Jewish, and I'm not surprised. I looked really ill. I was very thin. I could hardly walk. I don't know how my face looked, but my auntie managed to convince them that I wasn't Jewish. So they gave me a letter. I went to a convent. They didn't want to keep me because they thought I was very ill. They bought me a bus ticket and I went to Krakow. I found another convent, but I wasn't very happy because I didn't know the Polish, the Catholic prayers, and they prayed several times a day. So one day when the priest arrived, I asked him if he would take me. He had a little garden and he was very kind. Of course, nobody knew I was Jewish. And I stayed with him for a while, and then a couple came one day and they wanted a girl to help them in the house. I asked them if they would take me, and that is how at 11 and a half I became a maid. I worked for them. They hired me out to work for another family. They sent me to church. When I arrived, I wrote to Edek to give him my address. And 6 months after the war, my auntie came, and she took me to Krakow and put me in a home for children, for Jewish children who survived with false papers and or hiding. And however, after the war in Poland, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and where we were, people knowing that we were Jewish, they would throw stones at the house and at us. So one day, people in charge decided to leave Poland. We went to Paris, and my auntie found another orphanage for for French children, Jewish children who have lost their family. I went to school. My education is French. My language is French. But when I was 24, I came to England just for a few months to improve my English. I met an Englishman. We got married. I have 2 sons and 2 grandsons, and I love them very much. My message is, we must remember what happened to 6 million Jews during the war and stand up to persecution of innocent people and be the light in the darkness. Thank you very much.
Eile mali rachamim, shocheine b'maromim, hamtzei menucha nechona al kanefei השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים לנשמות ששת מיליוני אחינו בני ישראל, אנשים, נשים וטף שנהרגו ושנשחטו שנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנקברו בידי הנאצים ועוזריהם יימח שמם באושוויץ מיידניק טרבלינקה מאטהאוסן ברגן-בלזן ובשאר מחנות ההשמדה ומסרו נפשם על קדושת השם בעבור כולנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם מסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום. על משכבם ונאמר אמן.
My God.